Okay, we're going to do a reading from The Enchanted Caravan by Dorothy Gilman Butters. It was published in 1949. I think it was her very first book. And the dedication is for J. Bruce and Elsa Gilmore, her parents. I hope you enjoy it. We'll be doing a reading of the first chapter in this episode. Chapter 1. The sun had just risen and was throwing long, cool shadows over the road to Gallop Corners. There was not a sign of life to be seen anywhere. The trees on Crescent Mountain stood out clearly in the dawn, like tufts of green wool and pale ravelings of gold along their outer rims. But in the valley from which the road issued, the mist still moved sluggishly among the hollows, like a ghost river that had nowhere to go. In the big house on the hill overlooking Gallop Corners, Jenny Margaret Peel stood before a wide bay window and shivered. The checkerboard linoleum was cold to her bare feet, and there was a draught from the hall that stirred the folds of her night. But it was not from the cold that Jenny Margaret trembled, for she was as hardy as a Vermont sapling. "That's the road he'll come on," she announced stormily, and then, because she received no answer, she said, loudly and fretfully, "Lucy, do wake up. Lucy, do you think he'll come today?" There was a sudden movement from the gleaming white bed. "You woke me up," said Lucy flatly, and not without resentment. "I was asleep, and you woke me up." She regarded Jenny Margaret solemnly, like a heavy-lidded young owl. Jenny Margaret pointed at the row of identical beds that marched the length of the room. "Everyone's gone," she contributed. "The bell rang 5 minutes ago. They're washing their faces." Lucy's round cheeks paled, but she did not move. "You're terrible," she cried. "You know I always sleep through the bell, and what's more, you let me. How can I win a gold star this month if I'm late to breakfast every morning?" "You can't eat a gold star. You can't even wear a gold star," said Jenny Margaret distastefully. "I can't imagine why you would want one so badly. Why," she added scornfully, "all it means is that you're a good orphan." "Sometimes I don't care for you at all, Jenny Margaret Peel," said Lucy. She nibbled absently at her fingernail. Then, remembering she was going to grow it long like a movie star, she had examined it anxiously, saw the damage had been done, and bit it off like a young savage. "After all," she said, added crossly, "I can't help if I have no parents. You have a father." "I have a father?" With a last glance at the road outside, Jenny Margaret turned indignantly to her friend. "What's the good of having a father if I must live all my life in an orphanage?" With one abrupt movement, she discarded her nightgown, tossed it to the floor, and began pulling on the green uniform that marked her as a member of the Gallop Corners Home for Homeless Children. Lucy watched placidly, like a young Buddhist swathed in sheets, for although she yearned for a world of perfection that brought gold stars and acclaim, she was lazy by nature, the last in bed and the last to rise. With more affection, she said now, "Do you really believe he'll come today?" Jenny Margaret considered this for a moment. With the removal of the voluminous nightgown, it was apparent that she was thin and wiry, small for her age, and intensely active, as the network of bandages upon her knees proved. Her face was slim and pointed, and not at all pretty, but nevertheless appealing, for the force of her personality revealed itself in the splendor of her eyes. "Ha!" sniffed Jenny Margaret. "You say he is, but how do you know? It's quite possible that he's an impostor." Lucy was stunned. "You mean?" Jenny Margaret nodded. "It may be a plot, a smooth, slick move. But anyway," she added uneasily, "what makes him come here? I'm almost 14 years old now, and I've never seen him. Why does he come?" "Maybe he's inherited $1 million, suggested Lucy. "It's more likely," said Jenny Margaret darkly, "that I have." She raised her chin angrily. "I may be a princess, you know, with a disinherited kingdom, or the heiress of millions, and born to the blue. Why, Jenny Margaret Peel, Miss Arbuckle says you were born right here in Gallup's Corners, and your father worked in the boiler rooms. So there." "Well, you better get up," counted Jenny Margaret coldly. "There's knitting class right after breakfast." As she saw Lucy brighten and jump from bed, her own movements slowed correspondingly, for she intensely disliked knitting. It was difficult for her to sit still and pour all of her energy into 10 fingers, and then, too, the needles were slippery, no matter what kind she used, and she made so many mistakes that no one ever praised her as they did Lucy. But since reading The Tale of Two Cities, her attitude toward knitting had mellowed. Now she liked to think of herself as a young Madame Defarge, working beside the guillotine. In her mind she had already beheaded several board members of the orphanage, the janitor's son who made pie beds, and a plump contemporary with long blonde curls. If he should come," suggested Lucy, banging bureau drawers. "Will they tell him about us, I mean?" "Of course they will," Jenny Margaret said gloomily. "What else do they do all day long but think up beastly, wicked ways to tease us? Horrid people." "Oh, I don't know," Lucy remarked mildly, tying knots in her hair ribbon. "Miss Arbuckle isn't so bad. She gave me a chocolate bar yesterday and said I was cute." "Nuts," said Jenny Margaret. "It's just to trap you." "Well," said Lucy, who had of late begun to develop opinions of her own, "I still think she's nice. I'll bet she won't tell your father how we ran away to the circus and all." "Nuts," murmured Jenny Margaret eloquently. "And besides," continued the fair-minded Lucy, "you said they'd boil us in oil when we got back, but they didn't do that." "Oh, for heaven's sakes," cried Jenny Margaret rebelliously, "you don't have to be so petty. And they will tell my father about the circus. They will. Lucy opened her mouth to reply, but they were both silenced by the unmistakable sound of Oxford heels upon the floor outside. "Jenny Margaret Peel," called a voice from the hall, as Jenny Margaret shrank against the wall, the figure of Miss Arbuckle burst in upon them. Good morning," cried Miss Arbuckle. "Jenny Margaret, we've just received the great news. Your father will arrive this morning, not long after breakfast. Lucy, bring her along now, won't you? Oh, my dear, what a momentous day for you." "Yes," whispered Jenny Margaret sickly. "Oh, Lucy, whatever shall I do?" "Why," said Lucy, smiling brightly at Miss Arbuckle, "brush your teeth and go to breakfast. Come along, Jen." Jenny Margaret nodded. She stood up, testing her knees. Just as she thought, they wobbled. Carefully placing one foot before the other, as if unsure of her strength, she walked to the door where Lucy and Miss Arbuckle awaited her patiently. She was, after all, only 13. Madame Defarge had been well along in years.